Hi, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State, my daily rendition of the news of the day. It shouldn't really be a big piece of news, but Hillary lied again. And, this is kind of a theme that runs throughout her life. Through a spokesman, she told the media that she had no idea that her campaign was funding this dossier. In fact, she says she didn't even know about the dossier until after the election was over. What a hunk of, as she would put it, baloney. Hillary undoubtedly knew about this dossier and undoubtedly knew that her campaign was funding it. First of all, she used it during the debate, during her debates with Trump, the second and the third debate. She damn near quoted from it and talked about this effort conceived in the Kremlin to influence the American election, directed personally by Vladimir Putin and his people, to win favor in the United States, and that they supported Trump because he wanted to weaken NATO and drive fissures in the Atlantic Alliance. All of that stuff that she used in the second and third debate is almost verbatim from the dossier. Obviously, she knew about it. And also everybody in Washington knew about it. The Fusion, the firm that prepared it, paid for by the Clinton campaign, had peddled it all over Washington. They would try to get media outlets to run it. And they approached the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, USA Today, AP, Politico, The Hill. Finally, they got Mother Jones to write an article about it a week before the election, but there were no takers on it. But everybody knew it was out there. Everybody knew they were peddling it. People didn't have copies, but they knew it. And obviously, if a campaign was paying for it, you can be damn sure that they got a copy of it as it was prepared. It would just stand to reason that they would. And this is Hillary's MO. She does it all the time. She did it in 1992, for example, when she was trying to besmirch the women who accused Bill of having relationships with them. And she did it again in 1998 when she wanted to attack Monica Lewinsky and call her a stalker and say that this was Lewinsky's fault and that she was framing Bill. It's her standard procedure. She hires a law firm so that discovery is limited and is protected by attorney-client privilege. So congressional and other investigators can't ask the attorney to give them information about the matter Hillary is retaining them to do. Then the law firm hires private investigators. Now, the relationship between a campaign and private investigators is, of course, not protected, not privileged. But between a campaign and a candidate on the one hand and their law firm on the other, certainly is protected by attorney-client privilege. So that's the game. And she did this time with Obama's counsel, Mark Elias, who was Obama's main lawyer. The firm was Perkins something. And Bob Bauer, who was the principal of the firm, became White House counsel. So she used this Obama-linked firm, and they then funded the dossier through Fusion, and Fusion then hired Steele, and there were several layers of separation and privilege so that they could avoid having to answer questions about it. But this is her M.O. And it was a huge expenditure. You don't spend $165,000 of a campaign's money without the candidate knowing about it, or at least the campaign staff knowing about it, and they wouldn't do it without consulting with Hillary about it. This is a huge expenditure, a gigantic project, and one that could blow back in their faces. And they obviously had to tell her about it because it was essential. And as I said, the elements of the dossier kept popping up again and again and again in Hillary's public statements after the hacking of her of the Democratic Party computer, and the release of those emails. They were quick to say it was the Russians, and that was based on what was coming out in the dossier. So Hillary printed this piece of fiction and succeeded in fooling herself, and then using that as the basis in the campaign for trying to defeat Donald Trump. And it was, and for her to now deny it and put distance between herself and it is absurd. The campaign got these memos as Steele wrote them. And if you trace Hillary's and her campaign statements through this period, they first said, when the hack occurred, if it was a hack, I think it was a leak, I think it was Bernie Sanders staffers who worked for the Democratic Party who were mad because the party apparatus under Debbie Wasserman Schultz was biased in Hillary's favor. And they were for Bernie Sanders, and that was not kosher. The party was supposed to be neutral. And they, I think, released these memos to embarrass Schultz and topple her from power, which they did. Anyway, right after these emails were released, John Podesta, Hillary's manager, was out there saying it was done as a hack and saying that the Russians did it. And they kept up this line. They got U.S. intel agencies to confirm that the Russians did it. 17 of them issued a joint statement to that effect. And the whole thing was a setup, all based on the so-called research in this dossier. Now, there is some interesting progress going on in the investigation of this uranium scandal. What are we doing? Okay. In this uranium scandal. The FBI informant who investigated it, who went undercover and infiltrated the companies involved and exposed the bribery and the corruption and the extortion that Russia was trying to do to get these firms to open up their uranium supplies to the Russians. This informant had been barred from testifying before Congress or speaking out in public by the Justice Department. And now, after the congressional committee leaders met with Jeff Sessions, he has lifted that ban. And this informant, we still don't know his name, will testify in public. And according to Victoria Toensing, his lawyer, who I know well and is a very reputable and aggressive conservative lawyer, he will name names and provide specific evidence of bribery from Russia to these companies. Now, what's important about that is that the FBI knew all about it. And it was their informant who's going to testify. So Mueller, when he was head of the FBI, and then Comey, when he took over head of the FBI, and throughout this entire process, McCabe, who was the acting deputy director of the FBI, and then for a while acting director, and Rod Rosenstein, who was the assistant attorney general in charge of overseeing the FBI, and Holder, the attorney general, all knew about these bribes taking place. They all knew about this bribery scheme right out there in public. And yet, when the accusation surfaced of the Russians working with Trump, they never revealed it. They never talked about it. And in 2015, Peter Schweitzer, who now works with Breitbart, published his famous book called Clinton Cash. That book is a classic in American literature, campaign literature. And that book revealed the bribery in the uranium scandal. The $500,000 that Clinton was paid Bill to speak to Renaissance Bank, a Russian-controlled bank, which was really a bribe to Bill and Hillary to get Hillary to vote in favor of the sale of the uranium to Russia, which she did several months later. When he exposed that, coming a day after, by the way, the speech came a day after the Russian infiltration of the U.S. was exposed by these sleeper agents. When all of this came out to the FBI, none of these guys mentioned it. None of them talked about it. They all shut up. Complete wall of silence. And this shows the extent to which the FBI was political, was bent to a political purpose. The whole agency, not just a few of these top guys, but the whole thing. In Rogue Spooks, the book Eileen and I wrote, we exposed this. And we have a chapter on how they made the FBI and the CIA blue. They used to be red, and then they were blue. Here are these two agencies. FBI, the dominant agency in the United States for tracking down communists and dissidents and people who might wish us ill and want to overthrow our government, and also for tracking down spies and agents. And the CIA, which operates abroad, which work to destabilize and overthrow communist and leftist regimes throughout the world and anti-American regimes. So these two agencies, the guardians of the gate, the guardians of American values and policies, suddenly flip and they become left-wing. And we explain how that happened. Brennan, for example, reorganized the whole CIA. He totally redid it. And whereas in the past, it was longitudinally organized, horizontally organized. I'm sorry, not longitude, latitude. Horizontally organized. So all the intel agents were in one place. The support personnel were another. The analysts who worked at the desks were in another. But he changed it and made it geographically oriented, vertically oriented, so that all of the Western Europeans worked together, all of the Latin Americans, all of the Near Easterners. And the idea was that the agents and the analysts and the logistics people were all under one directorate based on geography, paralleling the structure of our armed forces. Now, why did he do that? Well, there may have been reasons for operational efficiency, but in the Bureau, it was widely resented, heavily resented in the CIA. And the agents who were the spies of foreign territory said, I am not going to be directed by some clerk someplace simply because the clerk is operating in this sphere. I want to be run by an agent who knows about field work and is sensitive to my needs. And it precipitated droves of resignations. Large numbers of people left their jobs. And Brennan went around making sure that each of those posts were filled by leftists who would advance the left-wing agenda to change the agency into a force for leftist ideas, not for conservative values. And at the same time, the Holder and the FBI brought actions against the CIA agents who had interrogated terrorists in Guantanamo. And they harassed them, they investigated them. After the investigation, every single one of them was cleared. They said these guys just acted the way they were supposed to according to the agency protocols. And then Brennan asked them to be investigated again. And they were put on the hot seat a second time. Nobody was fired, but huge numbers of people quit. And all of this was designed to create vacancies so you could move liberals in, leftists in. I'm telescoping it now, but in Rogue Spooks, we really lay it out. And now, finally, we're going to get an insight into the internal workings of the FBI and how this leftist agenda infiltrated the entire agency.
Wow, we have a lot of questions pouring in. We have 1,600 people right now, and we're number 2 in the world. So, well, first we have one from Jim Dunham. Will Manafort be given immunity to testify to get the Podestas and Clinton, or will Mueller have to be removed to make that happen?
Well, I think Mueller may be removed anyway. Are we up now? Are we posted, linked? The petition?
No, not yet.
Okay.
No.
In a few minutes, we'll have a petition on dickmorris.com to oust Mueller and to force him to recuse himself, but we'll talk about that later. No, I don't think Manafort will get immunity, nor do I think it's a particularly good idea. Manafort is going to take the position that he has nothing for which to be granted immunity, and he has not taken the Fifth Amendment. Immunity is usually when somebody says, I refuse to testify because this could incriminate me. And then you give him immunity, which means you can say whatever you like, and we're not going to use it to prosecute you. But Manafort hasn't taken the Fifth. He's answered all the questions. And so the issue of immunity really doesn't arise.
And Roger Richter wants to know, if Hillary is found guilty, will she actually do time?
Well, you're ways away from ahead of yourself. There's every reason to think that she might, but we're not up to that yet. Wish we were, but we're not. Now, Grassley, the head of the Government Oversight Committee, has called for the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate the uranium scandal. He tweeted today, "Whoever in the Justice Department is capable with authority to appoint a special counsel should do so to investigate the Uranium One scandal." That is the first public call for a special prosecutor in this scandal. And it comes from the chairman, I believe, of the Judiciary Committee, or if not that, of the Oversight Committee, Grassley, a key senator, key Republican. And that call, which I think will now be echoed all over, may well result in a special prosecutor. Remember a couple of weeks ago and days ago, you've asked me about a special prosecutor. And I said there has to be kind of a crescendo that rises from the establishment to say, you really ought to do this. And the compromising of Mueller and Comey and Rosenstein and Holder and all those guys in this scandal, and their complicity with the dossier and with not exposing the FBI bribery investigations when that was the central issue in the election, this is all leading people to believe that the agency, the FBI, has become so politicized, so biased, that it has to be investigated itself. And the only way to do that is to do it with a special prosecutor who's going to investigate the investigators. And I think that the Wall Street Journal yesterday, I read you their editorial calling for an independent counsel, and now Grassley's statement. Give a couple more weeks of this, a couple of more people coming out, and I think Trump and Sessions will do it. Now, can Sessions do it? I say he can. Sessions recused himself, but not from all matters relating to Russia. All matters relating to Russian meddling and influence in the U.S. election, which is the mandate that Mueller has. And Sessions has recused himself from that. But the Uranium One scandal isn't that, and I don't think he will be able to recuse himself on that. I think that it'll be right in his lap, and that he himself is going to have to move to go ahead with that and appoint a special prosecutor. I don't think his recusal will give him anything to hide behind. Now, so we're really closing in on him. It's coming very good, and they're increasingly looking at a special prosecutor. Trump had an interesting comment today. He said this whole scandal is coming back on the Democrats. I've often called it doubling back on the Democrats. And that's exactly what's happening. It's their scandal now. And part of the scandal is how we were misled into believing there was any substance to this crazy allegation that Russia was colluding with Trump to help him win the election. Russia may have tried to help Trump win. Russia has always played favorites in U.S. elections. God knows why they chose to do that. But the accusation that they were decisive in the election and did this with Trump in complicitous is completely far-fetched.
Elizabeth Warren wants to know, President Trump, well, she's commenting, President Trump said they spent $6 million on that dossier. Is that true?
Six what?
$6 million on the dossier?
No, $160,000 was actually paid for it. I don't know where $6 million comes from, but, you know, who's counting? A lot of money.
Yes. And Sean Hummingbird asks, what's your thoughts on McCain? What does he have to gain by siding with the Dems and Clintons and Bushes?
Well, I think McCain is a bitter old man. I think that he's very angry because of the way Trump treated him in the primaries, and boy, he ought to be. When Trump said he's no hero, heroes don't surrender. Well, for God's sakes, he was in a bomber. The bomber was shot down. What's he supposed to do, not pull the chute and commit suicide? This was a ridiculous, absurd comment, offensive, coming from a man who himself has never served. Just horrible. And I think McCain won't forgive it and won't forget it. I wonder if there isn't some clinical problem going on. I wonder if the tumor has not in some way affected his judgment. I can't make that accusation without any knowledge and without being a doctor and all that, but he's acting pretty weird lately. And it's pretty scary that he and one other person could stop the Trump agenda, or two others actually.
And Thomas Hillenbrand asks, how will the Dems deflect this investigation?
I don't think they can. I think that the investigation is going to go on, and we're going to learn more and more about this Russian bribery. And we're going to learn more and more about the silence of the FBI in telling us about it. This is truly, like Simon and Garfunkel said, the sounds of silence. Now, a judge appointed by Obama, a U.S. District Court judge for D.C., has ruled that Trump need not pay the subsidies to the health insurance companies, that the law does not require it. And as a result, Obamacare, you can hear it slowly being sucked down the drain. It's dying. And I would just personally urge anyone who is depending on Obamacare for health insurance to think again. You can get a better buy outside of it, and eventually that market is going to free up very significantly. But this was significant that an Obama-appointed judge ruled that the subsidies do not have to be paid. Now, these videos are sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. Gold has gone up by 12% since Trump took office. And Goldman Sachs just issued a report saying that it's going to go up by another 10%. And as fears grow about North Korea, about increasing the deficit, and about the idea that the politicians are going to just keep printing money without any end in sight or any control, gold is obviously going to go up. So please call the Patriot Gold Group. Renee is posting the number in the comments section. Or go to patriotgoldgroup.com, patriotgoldgroup.com. They're a good bunch of people.
The petition is up and running.
Okay.
It's on the heading of your video, so people can go to it once.
Okay, so click on the link that Renee has just posted to go to dickmorris.com and sign the petition demanding that Mueller recuse himself. He is now the object of this investigation, not an investigator, because Mueller knew that Russia had put sleeper agents in the United States to influence Hillary to get the uranium sale. Mueller knew that Hillary had voted in favor of the uranium sale. Mueller knew that Bill Clinton, in effect Hillary, had received a $500,000 payment by Putin for giving a speech in Moscow right before Hillary cast that vote on her committee. Mueller knew that the FBI had an informant who was actively keeping them posted on Russian efforts to bribe the Ukrainian companies and American regulators to permit this sale to continue and to go forth. And he knew all of this stuff, and he didn't say anything about it. And I think that's significant. I also would submit to you that Mueller had to know that Hillary's campaign had paid for the dossier. They never revealed that fact, but they had to know it. It was the first thing you would learn in this investigation. With subpoena power and the coercive ability to force answers, they obviously knew that. So whether you like Mueller or not, or you think he's going overboard, or you think there's any substance to this collusion charge that he's supposed to investigate, I think everybody can agree that he has become just too political to conduct this investigation fairly. And by the way, not only Mueller knew about it, but Weissman, his chief deputy, who was his chief investigator, who was in the Justice Department overseeing this investigation of the uranium bribery. So obviously he knew about it, and obviously he was silent during this entire period as well. So go to dickmorris.com or click on the link that Renee is posting in the comments section and go sign that petition.
Yeah, it's not posted yet, but it will be once we close out.
Oh, not posted yet, but will be.
We're working on it.
Once we close out. I don't know why, but go there. Now, tax cut. The tax cut is moving forward very nicely. The Senate proposed a budget, and these budgets are just rough numbers, saying we'll have a deficit of $1.5 trillion over a 10-year period. And that deficit will be used for tax cuts. And it didn't explain what the tax cuts would be or anything else about them. But it did identify the amount, and it did specify that this would not be paid for by spending reductions, but would be paid for by deficit spending. Now, I can hear your hackles rising and your hair standing on edge, but get over it. The record of deficit spending under the Republicans when they cut taxes is wonderful. The revenues always catch up with it and overtake it, and in fact you end up with massive new revenues. You don't see it because the Democrats spend it as fast as it comes in. So there's always a deficit, but when you look at it, you look at the numbers, you see how the tax cut generates economic growth. And given the strength of the economy now, given the way it's roaring back, I think the tax cut will go through, and I think it will be very, very important for the American people. Now that the House and the Senate have agreed on the numbers, now they can focus on the details. And there are a couple of ideas floating around. One, which I'm not against, would be the idea of laying some of this off on a gas tax increase. With vehicle mileage dropping and the price of gas dropping, I think a few cents wouldn't be a big problem. On the other hand, there's also a proposal to cap 401ks and say that you can only put $2,500 a year into it, not $18,500 as you can at the moment. I think that's horrible. I think it would wipe out middle-class savings. It would make it impossible and unlikely that the middle class will be able to save for retirement. You would pay for it in elderly poverty down the road. What are you supposed to retire on? Social Security is questionable. The pensions are going broke one after the other. The interest rates are so low that who can accumulate anything by a savings account? You can use the market, but that's volatile. And ultimately, the 401ks are the best way to go. But by limiting the amount you can deposit tax-free into a 401k, you're limiting the amount people will deposit. And that's going to cut way back on retirement savings. Very bad time to do that.
Dick, Glenn Pierce asks, was uranium physically handed over to Russia, or is it a bookkeeping thing?
The mines were.
The mines were, okay. And Hector Morales says, with the revelations of Uranium-1, don't Corker and Flake have the worst timing in history?
Yeah, they do. But let's talk about Corker and Flake in general, their decision to retire, each of them. Flake is more open in why he retired. But he gave a very interesting statement on the Senate floor, which I think should be re-entitled Confessions of a Rhino. Republican in name only. Rhino. He said, it's tough. I'm competitive. I like to fight these battles. But I also knew that I couldn't run the kind of race that I would be proud of and win a Republican primary at this time. The politics in that way have changed. Now, what I think he means by that is that he'd have to actually begin to take positions on conservative issues. And he'd have to do things to appease the base that he didn't want, like the border wall, or like really enforcing the immigration laws, or the E-Verify system that he's in the process now of trying to kill. Conservatives want E-Verify and the wall to be included in any deal that gives the Dreamers ongoing amnesty through DACA. And Flake is opposing that, saying we don't want those in the bill. We want just a clean bill giving them amnesty. That's what he wants. And if he were caught in a primary fight, he'd have to take the other position because voters won't agree with him. He said, because of the state of our disunion, I regret them retiring because of the disrepair and destructiveness of our politics, because of the indecency of our discourse, the coarseness of our leadership, the compromise of our moral authority, and our complicity in this alarming and dangerous state of affairs. Well, this reminds me of the old British arguments, royalty and nobility, against universal suffrage, that it would coarsen the democratic process, and that we should be much more circumspect and much more gentlemanly and ladylike in our dialogue. Well, that's a way to say, let's cover it all up. Let's not tell people the truth while we sell them out in private in return for campaign contributions. Let's just settle this whole thing like gentlemen over drinks at the Hay Adams Hotel, which I love, and not work it out in public. This whole idea that we need civility in our discussion is really a code word for don't tell the truth. She says reckless, outrageous, and undignified behavior has become excused and countenanced as telling it like it is, when it is actually just reckless, outrageous, and undignified. Well, I don't think the problem, Mr. Flake, in our politics is that our politicians are too outspoken and too courageous in telling us the truth. I think it's the opposite. I think they sugarcoat stuff, they use euphemisms, they use evasions to avoid telling us the truth. For example, when you say you're tough on border security and you get elected senator from Arizona twice, espousing how tough you are on border security, but then in the conference room, you're trying to kill the wall and you're trying to kill E-Verify. He said because of political considerations, because we might make enemies, because we might alienate the base, because we might provoke a primary challenge, because ad infinitum, ad nauseum, when we succumb to these considerations in spite of what should be greater considerations and imperatives in defense of our institutions, of our liberty, then we dishonor our principles and forsake our obligations. These things are far more important than politics. Well, it's not that. It's if you agreed with your base, if you reflected their views, if you agreed with the people that elected you, you wouldn't have a problem. You wouldn't be afraid of a primary fight. You'd welcome it because you'd win the primary easily because people agree with you and they don't agree with your opponents. It's called democracy. But you're saying that it somehow is coarse and awful to have to take positions we don't agree with in order to avoid getting a primary and alienating our political base. Boo-hoo. That means that you can't say what we believe because you don't believe in it. Well, if you don't want to say what we believe because you don't believe in it, get the hell out of the way. And let's nominate a candidate like Kelly Ward, your opponent, who really is going to do what we believe needs to be done, who really does see eye to eye with us. It's important for us to realize that we're at a juncture in the Republican Party where there is a fourth layer being added to the layer cake. It might go up to 7, but it's 4 now. When Reagan took office, the Republican Party was essentially an institution that was devoted to economic freedom. That was the cake. Then Reagan came in and he put another layer on top of the cake, the national security layer. And then he put another layer, a third layer, the social conservative layer. And that 3-layer cake, national security, economic liberty, and social values, became the Republican Party. Now Trump is adding a 4th layer to it, a pro-American nationalist layer focused primarily on the needs of the American working class, with a priority on protecting their interests and our national interests, and sometimes superseding purist free market economics in order to do that. And now it's a 4-layer cake, not a 3-layer cake. And that makes it very unpalatable to guys like Flake and Corker, who are basically globalists, who will now go out and make a happy living working for globalist institutions and writing articles and making themselves martyrs to Trump's tyranny. But it's a new cake, it's a new party, and we have to understand when these guys leave, and thank goodness they leave, as opposed to trying to con us.
Dick, Marion Sollers asks, where does Soros fit in this scandal?
Well, in the uranium scandal, I have no idea. But Soros is very busy in promoting amnesty throughout the world, asylum. He wants to change. Soros is focused on immigration. He wants to change the complexion of the democracies so that they become leftist and become third world and become friendly to Muslim views. That's why in Europe he's now pushing the idea of mandatory asylum for each of the European countries, quotas of numbers of people they must each accept or lose EU funding. And that's Soros's move here. It also is interesting to note that Soros is pushing for votes for felons. Right now, there are only about 4 states in the country that permit people who have committed felonies to vote. 2 of them, Maine and 1 other, permit them to vote while they're in prison. A bunch of others permit them to vote on the day of their release, even if they're released on parole. There are still others that say you can get the right to vote after you've served your sentence and after the parole is ended, so you're now not under any judicial supervision. And then there are others that say you have to wait 10 years or 15 years, and then there are others that say once you're in jail for a felony, you can't vote for anything. Now, it comes to 4.7 million people in the U.S. who are former felons, people who've committed felonies, and are denied the right to vote. Now, that's pretty important. That's about 3% of our vote, 3 to 4%. You let them in, and they're all going to vote Democrat. Most of them are minorities, and you'll never win another national election. So Soros is focused on that. And he has put $7.5 million from his Open Society Foundation, which is his financial arm, into the Brennan Center, which has been lobbying for votes for felons. So that's an area we have to watch and have to be very vigorous about.
I'm looking for my questions. I just lost it.
Now, the very interesting development from Sessions. Remember back to the IRS scandal? Remember Lois Lerner and how they targeted conservative groups and harassed them and gave them audits and all kinds of stuff that was very, very intrusive, very burdensome, tied them up in record keeping for months and years and didn't let them go out and raise money. Well, Sessions has just settled. There were 469 conservative groups that filed a class action suit against the IRS for its conduct. And Sessions announced today that he has settled that lawsuit. We don't know the financial terms yet. But Sessions said, as Attorney General, it is now clear that during the last administration, the IRS began using inappropriate criteria to screen applications for 501c3 status. That's tax exemption. These criteria, including names such as Tea Party, Patriots, or policy positions concerning government spending or taxes, education, or trying to make America a better place. That's a quote. It is also clear that these groups disproportionately disproportionately impacted conservative groups. In other words, if you had the name Tea Party in your group, you weren't going to get tax-exempt status. They'd spend a year peppering you and annoying you with questions. Give me the minutes of your last 400 meetings, go back 10 years, tell me every organization every one of you was ever affiliated with, all kinds of crap like that. It was like a 30-page questionnaire. These are for most groups that had no paid staff. They were just amateurs and exercising free speech. As a result of these criterion, Sessions said, the IRS transferred hundreds of applications to a specifically designated group of IRS agents for additional levels of review, questioning, and delay. What an admission. In many instances, the IRS then requested highly sensitive information from applicants, such as donor information, that was needed to make a determination of tax-exempt status. In March of last year, a unanimous 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals criticized Obama's DOJ for its handling of the case, writing that in this lawsuit, the IRS has only compounded the conduct that gave rise to it. Sessions said there is no excuse for this conduct. Hundreds of organizations were affected by these actions, and they deserve an apology from the IRS. We hope that today's settlement makes clear that this abuse of power will not be tolerated. Bravo, whoopee. I mean, that is manna from heaven.
Well, first of all, the petition is up on your Facebook page as well as dickmorris.com.
Okay, so go to the petition, sign it, and because we want to force Mueller to recuse himself, and this Uranium 1 scandal gives us clearly the basis for demanding that.
Dick, Steve Asman asks, what is your opinion of Paul Ryan?
I know him very well, where we've spoken a lot. First of all, he's brilliant. He has a mind that is well above the caliber of most American politicians. He's a bit of a nerd. He's a bit of a wonk. He focuses on statistics, not on politics. When I met with him and had a series of meetings, he was projecting a 10-year budget plan that said that in the 10th year we were going to have to give people the option of opting out of Medicare and getting private insurance. And I said, well, you're not going to do that for 10 years, are you? And he said, no, we'll get to it in 2012. I said, why are you saying it now? And he said, because we'd make 10-year projections. And I said, what, are you determined to lose 10 years worth of elections until we get to that point? Why do you have to make this a big deal now? But he did anyway, and it became a major talking point for the Obama administration against the Republican Party. I think that he's learned. I think that he's grown. I think that he's doing the best job he can as Speaker. It's a very hard job because there are so many factions in the House, and the power of the Speaker is not nearly the dictatorial power it used to be. So I like Paul Ryan. I think it's very good that he's there, and I think he needs to stay there. It's unfortunate that he's been lumped in with Mitch McConnell, who I do not like, who is part of the deep state, who is a go-along, get-along Republican, bought off by all kinds of special interest groups, and I don't trust him farther than I can throw him. But Paul Ryan is very different. Now, we just talked about the IRS. This is only half the story. The next half is kill the union. The reason the IRS is so outrageous, not just in its public policy toward conservative groups, but in its audits of people, in its persecution of people, simply because they make money. There is a National Treasury Employees Union, NTEU, with 82,000 members that includes the IRS. It's a very left-wing union. The leaders of it endorse every left-wing cause. Its treasury is open to the Democrats and to all kinds of left-wing groups, Acorn and the like. And the NTEU not only organizes the IRS, but they have substantial management power that has been conceded to them in contracts. They, for example, can determine who gets assigned where, who goes to what division, what organizations and entities there are within the IRS. They can conclude many of the laws and rules in dealing with taxpayers and grievances and all of that stuff. And constantly, there's a left-wing bent to it. Their goal really is to use their jobs for income redistribution, not to enforce the law, not to make sure there are no cheaters, not to make sure that government gets all the money it's entitled to, but aggressively to Robin Hood, take from the rich and give to the poor. And they see themselves as divinely given this mission. Now, I believe the IRS has no business having a labor union. The FBI doesn't. The CIA doesn't. Not because they haven't tried, but because there's a law banning it that says these agencies have such power and the individuals in them have such power that we can't possibly give them the right to unionize. And I think the IRS should be included in that law. Trump has never fired or replaced Koskin, Kosken, who was the head of the IRS, appointed by Obama in 2013. And he needs to change him, and he needs to push legislation to end the unionization of the IRS.
Dick, Jack Tapper wants to know, has there been any new news on the Vegas shooting and why all the silence on it?
I haven't seen anything, and I'm concerned about the silence about it. I don't know if you saw it, but the brother of the shooter was just busted on child pornography charges. But I don't know. I just don't know.
And what happened with the petition to stop bogus phone calls?
Frankly, we didn't get a lot of signatures. We got only about 500 or 600, and we passed it on, but I was disappointed. I hate it when I get these phone calls. It's always, "Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I want to tell you that you've just won the right to do blah, blah, blah." And I always yell at her and everything. Or then there's another one. There's one place that calls me and says, "Hi, is Mike there?" And I always say, "No, Mike doesn't live here." And says, "Michael, you sure he doesn't live there?" "Yeah, I'm sure. You have the wrong number." And then he goes, "Well, I might as well tell you." And then he goes into the pitch. So every day I get a phone call from Michael, and I say, "Sorry." Now, one of these days I might get a phone call. "Hi, this is Michael. Any calls?" We'll see about that.
Oh, boy. Lorraine Blair, that's a new name I haven't seen. Welcome, Lorraine. Why do you think the left is throwing around the term white privilege? Is it to demonize conservatives?
Yeah, it is. And to solidify the black vote. The left has a big problem, which is that a vast portion of its vote, probably about a third of it or half of it, comes from African Americans. And as black incomes rise, largely as the result of Republican policies, the temptation for minority members to leave the bloc and to begin to be independent, like guys like Clarence Thomas are. And that's Larry Elder and some others. That's a very real temptation. And they're attempting to create this myth that there is a huge belief in white supremacy, like there was 150 years ago, and that we need to unite as blacks against that approach. It's just wrong. It's trying to dredge up something from history and make it appear relevant now. And I think it's designed to stimulate political cohesion and liberalism among blacks.
And Biv Giffen, another new name, who is the Republican who started the opposition research? You heard about that?
Well, Republicans and Democrats started it. Probably the first practitioner of it, who really was famous, was Lee Atwater, who's a good friend, who ran Bush's 1988 campaign and went on to head the Republican Party and died of a brain tumor in early 1990.
And Charlotte Claunch Hall asks, I fear for the informant. Is he under protection?
I don't know. We'll see. So far, he still doesn't have a name. Well, thank you very much. Please go to my website, dickmorris.com, or click on the link adjacent to this petition and sign a petition.
Selfie of the day, too.
Okay. And sign a petition to make Mueller recuse himself in view of the Uranium 1 scandal. Now, the selfie today, you see, we have a picture of him.
It's hard to see him.
Hard to see it, but
I'm going to post it in the
holding
comments.
up a book, and his name is Anthony Moats Jr. M-O-M-O-A-T-S.
And he has a little message that I wanted to read.
Big fan of you, Dick. Found you on YouTube, love your show on FB, and love the book, too. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Anthony. Good. So, again, please share this with people so we can increase our audience and people can come to it. We're getting over 100,000 people to see each of these. In fact, about 150 on each of them lately, which is just thrilling, just fabulous. Thanks for watching.